The world has once again witnessed the fragile nature of peace in the Middle East for 12 continuous days. As the skies over Iran and Israel lit up with fire, the entire globe watched in anxious silence. But at what cost? And more importantly, what does this so-called peace really mean when thousands continue to die in Gaza, when children still cry for food, and when families are being torn apart with every passing day, while world powers race to prevent the Strait of Hormuz from being blocked? Fearing for the global economy, he said there was great progress toward a ceasefire in Gaza. But his words, like many before him, are filled with vagueness and political theater. Donald's concern over the Iran conflict seemed genuine. Is a mother clutching her dead baby Hamas? Is a hospital filled with screaming patients Hamas? This is not a war against terrorism. This is not. They are human beings, with dreams, families, and futures. He said that if the U.S. puts its foot down, Israel finds it hard to say no. But Gaza, when Iran threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz, global leaders panicked. Oil prices soared. Diplomats scrambled. A ceasefire was swiftly arranged, because global economic order was at risk. Gaza is not seen as a threat to Wall Street. They say, we are concerned, we urge restraint, we hope for peace. But peace without justice is oppression, and justice without accountability is impossible. The failure to stop the Gaza genocide is not just Israel's crime, but the world's complicity. It doesn't affect the stock market or the luxury resorts of European capitals. Gaza's children do not have lobbyists. Their tears do not move markets. Their blood does not stain the conscience of the powerful. It is a global shame. The silence, the inaction, the excuses, they all make the global community an accomplice. So the question remains, why isn't the foot down? Why hasn't America demanded a permanent ceasefire in Gaza? The Iran-Israel ceasefire exposed not only the fragility of peace, but the cruel selectiveness of international compassion. Why are Western leaders more concerned about oil prices and trade routes than about murdered children and bombed schools? Perhaps he fears political backlash. Perhaps he fears losing votes, just like any other war criminal. Those ordering strikes on civilians, on hospitals, on aid convoys, must stand trial. The ICC, the UN, and every international body must rise beyond statements and take real action. Otherwise, all the talk of human rights and international order is nothing more than a lie. Or perhaps, like many before him, he simply doesn't care enough. Their lives matter just as much as any Israeli or American. But the message from world powers, especially the West, is clear. Your lives are disposable, your pain is invisible, and your deaths are acceptable collateral damage. This is collective punishment, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. Gaza has become a laboratory for horror, and the world is watching, doing nothing. He expressed anger when Israel violated the ceasefire, using even harsh language toward Tel Aviv. But when it comes to Gaza, to Palestinian blood, to mass graves in Rafah, to the collapse of hospitals, and the bombing of refugee camps, Trump's voice becomes softer, more cautious, and wrapped in diplomatic fog. An oil supply there remained eerily silent as Palestinians were being starved, displaced, and killed in broad daylight. And global outrage, while entire Palestinian families are erased from existence in one airstrike and it barely makes the news. The hypocrisy is not just disturbing, it is inhumane. Western governments have often justified their silence by saying they stand with democracy, with human rights. But where are those values now? The fear was not just of a localized war, but of an explosion that could have engulfed the entire region and even spilled over into a global confrontation. Over 500 Palestinians have been brutally killed in just a few weeks. Most of them were unarmed, helpless civilians, and in some cases, the support of the Western powers. Many of them were shot down while simply trying to get food, basic survival. The images that have come out of Gaza are not just heartbreaking, they are horrifying. Children torn apart by bombs, women screaming over the lifeless bodies of their loved ones. The Strip, already reduced to rubble, is now on the verge of starvation. And yet, despite these crimes against humanity, Israel continues its campaign, shielded by the silence. But then came an abrupt ceasefire, one that brought temporary calm, but did little to address the deeper wounds festering underneath. But will Israel listen? Will Tel Aviv's government, already drunk on its sense of impunity, stop the bloodshed just because a few UN officials raised concerns? History says otherwise. The ceasefire between Iran and Israel was hailed by many as a diplomatic victory. Palestinians are not numbers. They are not statistics on a UN spreadsheet. In the shadow of this Iran-Israel tension, the Gaza massacre intent, the spokesperson for the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights boldly stated, the Israeli military must stop shooting at people trying to get food. At the recent NATO summit in The Hague, US President Donald Trump made bold statements. Why this double standard? Why does the death of an Iranian scientist or an Israeli settler receive round-the-clock coverage, calling out Israel's breach of the Iran truce, but that boldness vanished when it came to confronting Netanyahu's policies in Gaza? Israel claims it is fighting Hamas, a terror organization, but as a starving child, Hamas. And in this silence, the voice of truth becomes louder. Trump, in one of his rare candid moments, admitted that America can force Israel to stop. The answer lies in priorities, or the lack thereof. This is the inhumanity of our age, where money matters more than morality, and silence is the price of political alliances. Donald's language was bold at times. As Gaza burns, world leaders tweet platitudes. Israel must be held accountable. The leadership in Tel Aviv must face international law. In the end, this is not just a Palestinian tragedy. In Gaza, the illusion of calm remains just that, an illusion. While the Iran-Israel ceasefire caught the world's attention and offered a glimpse of what urgent international intervention could look like, Gaza continues to burn under Israeli bombs, starve under blockade, and bleed under a system of impunity that treats Palestinian suffering as disposable. The Israeli offensive, far from being a tactical campaign against Hamas, has become a brutal manifestation of collective punishment against an entire population trapped in a cage with no escape. Since the renewed escalation, over 500 Palestinians have been killed in just a matter of days. Not on the battlefield, not while engaged in military resistance, but while doing something as basic as trying to find food. The term is not used lightly. Entire neighborhoods have been flattened. When Iran retaliated against Israel, global leaders were quick to push for diplomacy. Why? Because Iran threatened the Strait of Hormuz, a vital artery for global oil shipments. The economic threat to the world order sparked immediate action. Their resilience is not born of choice, but of necessity. The more people die, the more this system of selective morality is exposed. And one day, the same leaders who now justify these actions will be asked, why didn't you speak up? Why didn't you act? When the world turns its back, you either surrender or you endure. Tel Aviv's political and military leaders must be held responsible for the crimes committed in Gaza. The International Criminal Court, though often accused of bias and inefficiency, remains one of the few platforms where such crimes can be addressed. But beyond legal proceedings, there must be political consequences. Arms sales must stop. Diplomatic support must be withdrawn. Aid must be conditional. This is not about punishment, it is about preventing further slaughter. And Gaza endures, again and again, through siege, starvation, and slaughter. But the presence of peace, real peace, built on dignity, equality, and freedom. And for that to happen, the world must finally see Gaza not as a footnote, but as a front line in the struggle for human rights. Only then can we hope to move from mourning the dead to protecting the living. The international community has failed Gaza, not once, but repeatedly. The so-called rules-based order collapses every time Israel drops a bomb on a school, every time a Western leader defends it, every time the media frames the death of a Palestinian child as a necessary outcome of a complicated conflict. Sanctions, mediation, emergency UN sessions. But when Gaza's children are being torn apart by missiles, silence. Hospitals and schools, long seen as sanctuaries in war, have become frequent targets. The article calls on Donald Trump to show the same outrage towards Israel's actions in Gaza as he did when the Iran ceasefire was violated. And it's a fair demand. When the US truly wants something from Israel, it usually gets it. The Iran ceasefire proved that. Once Tehran hinted at closing Hormuz, Washington mobilized faster than at any point during the Gaza crisis. This reveals what truly motivates international diplomacy. Not justice, not humanity, but economic stability and political control. Aid convoys have been blocked, journalists silenced, and international observers sidelined. Gaza, already described as an open-air prison, now more closely resembles a mass grave, and rightfully so. Since the October 7th attacks and Israel's subsequent military campaign, there have been countless such claims, each followed by even greater violence. Gaza has become a graveyard of broken promises, where ceasefire announcements are political performances rather than genuine efforts to halt the carnage. Starving men, women, and children, gathering at aid distribution points in a Gaza Strip reduced to rubble, have been repeatedly gunned down. Gaza, on the other hand, offers no such financial leverage. Its people are seen as powerless, and thus expendable. Their lives, their deaths, their despair, none of it moves the world the way a potential market crash does. This is why even the smallest signs of Palestinian resistance are met with overwhelming force, not because they pose a real military threat, but because they dare to resist being erased. The statement from the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights is a damning indictment of Israel's tactics. The Israeli military must stop shooting at people trying to get food, yet the response from world powers remains tepid. Words of concern, carefully worded statements, and vague calls for restraint, while the children of Gaza are buried under the debris of silence and complicity. Donald Trump's statement during the NATO summit in The Hague, that there is great progress on a ceasefire in Gaza, was met with cautious optimism by some, but deep skepticism by many. The article rightly questions the sincerity of these efforts. It calls out the hypocrisy of Western nations, especially the United States, for their selective empathy. The same leaders who voiced outrage over human rights violations in Iran have offered unwavering support to Israel's actions in Gaza. The same media outlets that ran endless features on the plight of Iranian women failed to dedicate more than a few lines to starving Palestinian children. It is a matter of choice, a deliberate decision to value one life more than another, to uphold one narrative while suppressing another. It is not a question of ignorance. Under the guise of targeting Hamas, Israel has embarked on what many analysts and human rights organizations describe as ethnic cleansing. What makes this even more grotesque is the role of the so-called defenders of international law, Western nations who built the architecture of the post-World War II human rights system. This is not just a failure of foreign policy, it is a moral collapse. The global response to the Iran-Israel conflict was swift and focused because world leaders feared oil prices rising, shipping routes collapsing, and markets panicking. And yet, in the face of such horror, the Palestinian people remain defiant. But complicity has consequences. The longer the world enables this genocide, and that is what it is, the harder it becomes to justify its silence. The Palestinian people deserve not just the absence of war. The script ends with a call for accountability. Ceasefire is only the beginning. Justice must follow.